of this script took me way too long to write. Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm JJ the Bearded Bookworm, and today I'm going to be doing my review for Shadows of Self, book 2 in the second Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. It truly took me so long to write out my thoughts for this book because, surprisingly, I finally found a Brandon Sanderson book that I was pretty meh on. Even with Elantris, there was a lot of stuff that I did like, but with this one, it was just very, lukewarm on. It seems to be a lot of people's opinion on this second Mistborn series, especially because that first one was so epic. Whereas in the second one, the world itself is very realized, but I just feel like the execution of this story is not as good. Part of that, I feel, comes from when Brandon Sanderson wrote Mistborn. He wrote the first 3 Mistborn books as its complete trilogy all in one go. So he had the entire story for the entire series mapped out from the get-go. Whereas with this one, Alloy of Law started out as a short story. Sanderson wanted to do these series of short stories to kind of bridge the gap between the epic fantasy story of the first Mistborn trilogy and kind of bridge the gap to go with these series of short stories to go into the second Mistborn trilogy, which is going to be kind of like a 1980s computer program sci-fi-esque series. So like I said, Alloy of Law starts out as a short story, gets extended out to a full novel. And you can see that because Alloy of Law is very standalone. And then, in classic Brandon Sanderson form, he extends out that even more. So now it goes from a short story that got extended to an extended novel to now being a 4-book series. And in the second book, you see those massive growing pains that had to happen to make the series now coherent. You see our main characters, Wax and Wayne, almost take a back seat as far as a development perspective, because in Alloy of Law they got established, but now because we're going for the full series, we spent a lot more time following Marcy and also Steris, who Steris in the first book, just very flat character, like purposefully the most boring person you could possibly be. And then with Marcy, who was kind of like the useful sidekick person that got picked up with the lawman, she gets very focused chapters talking about her relationship with Wax especially, and how she's trying to make a name for herself and kind of establish herself as a constable, but feeling like she's living under Wax's shadow and kind of riding his coattails a little bit. So, like I said, Wax through this entire book is still Wax. Wax is the same character he was in Alloy of Law. Not much has changed, despite the fact that he's now becoming more accustomed to the city life, but from what I can tell, based on the story, he's been kind of just this renegade lawman that kind of does his own thing throughout the city. I don't know, I just expected him to kind of take that attitude that he had in the roughs and kind of apply it to his now life in the city as a nobleman, and kind of melding those two, kind of being this rough nobleman and really making a lot of changes or kind of inserting himself on the city. Wayne was fantastic as ever. I have zero complaints about Wayne. He's this comic relief. No, he didn't have any growth. He doesn't need growth. Although I say he didn't have growth, however, you see him starting to grow as a individual. His wisdom that he has, because he just comes across as just really dumb and eccentric. However, he just has a very, very unique and different way of looking at life. And he'll actually have these little tidbits of like golden wisdom where he'll say something and literally stop the other person that he's with, and they're just like, oh, wow, that makes a ton of sense. One thing I loved is Wayne is still doing his normal trading where he's stealing from somebody and leaving something in return. But what's funny about that is from the events from the first book, he's now one of the richest people in the city from the rewards from arresting Miles' 100 lives. But no, let him just continue doing his trading because that's how he feels. He doesn't understand gold or just buying things. He's like, oh, take this, trade it to somebody else. Or, oh, I want that, leave that in return. I guess just overall, I wanted the interactions with Wax and Wayne and Steris and Marcy just as in general kind of deepen more, because these are people that have been working together and living together and, you know, building these relationships with each other. I just wish they would show that a little bit more, of show them growing closer together, because this story takes place a year after the events from the first book. So essentially, Wax and Steris have been courting for a year at this point, and you would think that they would just get a little bit more familiar with each other. The plot in this book was predictable, but the thing that got me was in Alloy of Law, we established that there's almost this shadow organization trying to influence and take over Ellendale. However, that almost took a step back, which is fine if that is the main plot for the entire series. However, it didn't feel like that. It felt like it took a back seat because it almost didn't exist at all. And then all of a sudden, you know, Wax is, you know, contacting his person that he knows in this shadow organization and has a meet with him. He's like, oh yeah, we know about the serial killer going on. They're working with us. They're a necessary evil. Which seems weird that this super secret shadow organization is partnering with and using this super public serial killer that everybody's freaking out about. I realize we see the storyline a lot where a shadow organization is using like a frontman to kind of draw attention away from what they're really doing. However, it almost just feels like they partnered with them to start getting some things done, but that serial killer started getting out of control and they're just like, oh yeah, no worries, we got it under control. But they don't, and it's very clear from the beginning, and it almost just felt like they shoehorned that in to remind you that, oh, there is still this clandestine organization that they're still trying to work on taking down. Another thing I didn't like is it felt like the ending was rushed. You kind of got to this point where it was like, okay, we're about to catch the bad guy, and then just everything started snowballing really fast. And that's a fine thing by itself. However, this felt like in the beginning it was setting up for this multiple book narrative of trying to catch a serial killer. Like, not even anybody that they knew or were close to died. The other thing I didn't like, Harmony's a dick. I'm going to leave it at that because that's some spoilery territory. However, let me know if you've read the book down below how you're feeling about Harmony at this point in the story. So I've been pretty negative on this book so far, but here's some things I did actually like about this book. This book felt much more Mistborn-like than Alloy of Law did, and that came into the fact of like They talked about, a little bit more of like the history in the area. They're talking about Elend and the Survivor and Iron Eyes and these lore for this world at this point, kind of calling back to that world. Whereas in Alloy of Light, it very much felt like it's just like this little snapshot, and there were like these little tidbits, but this really showed the entirety of really feeling like this is the world that was set up in Mistborn Era 1. The other thing I really liked, and the thing that was probably the most intriguing, was the Faceless Immortals, the Kandra. Now in Era 1, the Kandra were kind of like this necessary evil, like an assassination servant type thing, where they made deals with specific families or individuals, and then were basically their servants for the entirety of their contract, their term. Whereas in this one, at this point, they're now servants of Harmony, and as far as anybody knows, they are the things of legends, things that don't actually exist, almost like a boogeyman or angels looking out for me, that kind of feeling. But we actually get to see them in this book, and it's fantastic. Like, it's really cool seeing the development from where they were in Era 1, the end of Era 1, and now them working as agents for Harmony. Now, I will say, I got done with this book, and I was super pissed. Like, I completely understand if somebody reads Shadows of Self and then decides to just drop Era 2 altogether. Because I was pissed as a mega fan of Mistborn and Sanderson as a whole, and it just felt dirty. Like, you get done and you're just like, all right, well, now I'm mad. I don't even know if I want to continue the series at this point. At this point, I've already read Bands of Mourning, and I will say, sneak peek for that, a lot of the issues that I had by the end of Shadows of Self did resolve themselves quite a bit in Bands of Mourning. So if you're watching this and trying to decide whether or not you should continue or start Mistborn Era 2, absolutely. I'm actually very excited to see what happens in the fourth book that's supposed to be coming out next year, based on what happens at the end of Bands of Mourning. So definitely stick with the series. So there you have it. That's my review for Shadows of Self. I'm realizing the Gunslinger and this are probably the contenders for my least favorite reads thus far this year. Let me know down in the comments. If you've read this book, let me know what you thought. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm JJ the Bearded Bookworm, and I'll see you next time.